Thomas Mack McLarty is chairman of McLarty Associates, an international strategic advisory firm based in Washington, D.C., and he's chairman of the McLarty Companies, a fourth-generation family-owned transportation business. A native of Hope, Arkansas, Mr. McLarty's distinguished record of business leadership and public service include a total of 5 years as White House Chief of Staff, Counselor to the President, and Special Envoy to the Americas. He was a member of the President's Cabinet and the National Economic Council under President Bill Clinton. During that time, Mr. McLarty helped enact the historic 1993 Deficit Reduction Package, the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Family and Medical Leave Law, and the landmark welfare reform legislation that enabled more than 6.8 million people to move from welfare to work. Mr. McLarty is our special guest on tonight's televised Startup Week GameChangers. We're honored to have him, and I hope you enjoy the interview.
Mr. McLarty, I've had the pleasure of visiting with you before, and I know, like most people watching this now, that you've had a very accomplished career. But you once told me that the thing that resonated with you most was seeing the positive impact of your work on others. Some of the most palpable examples of that is your work through Junior Achievement of Arkansas. Why is that so important to you, Mr. McLarty?
Okay, first, let me begin by saying I'm delighted to be with you. I do remember our earlier encounters, and congratulations on your new endeavor with Startup Junkie. You've got a great group of partners supporting your endeavor. It's exciting, and I think it already has been meaningful, and I think it has just great potential ahead to really provide some support for Arkansas entrepreneurs, both young and old. So I wish you well. So I'm delighted to be with you today.
I appreciate that.
And I think really, Caleb, not totally different from perhaps what motivated you a bit in your new venture here. I think most of us as human beings are motivated or have a natural tendency to want to try to be helpful, supportive to others, to have an impact where you can. There's a lot of ways to do that, both one-on-one and through organizations, through business, through academia, and so forth. But Junior Achievement was unique in the sense that it was a way to reach out directly to high school students in Arkansas. When we first started with Sheffield Nelson in the 80s, it has just grown so much larger than either Sheffield or I thought it would. It surpassed our vision and highest expectations, and we're proud of that and pleased about it. But when you give a young person a glimpse at our country, our economy, kind of what makes it run, you're helping them kind of think about how they pursue their lives and careers and how they build their lives, not just in business, but with their family, and help them kind of develop their own thinking about making choices. I think we've all had people in our lives, Caleb, that from time to time have had that moment that made a difference. And when you have something like Junior Achievement, it's not one-on-one, but you feel good about that. So thank you for asking. I think Junior Achievement, you may have a relationship with them through Startup Junkie as well. And the Girl Scouts, I believe you established a relationship with.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. We really enjoy working with them and really enjoy seeing, these young adults and students see the power of entrepreneurship at such a young age and kind of see how where that can take them. Then, the sky's the limit on that. Mr. McLarty, at the beginning of the 1990s, Fortune magazine wrote that the 90s would be the golden age for entrepreneurs. Some of today's most influential companies were created during that time, including Amazon, Google, eBay, PayPal, and even Netflix. The Bureau of Labor Statistics puts the number of one-year-old establishments or startups rising from 1994 to 2000, and the number of jobs created by those businesses was at its all-time highest from 97 to 2000. What do you attribute that growth in entrepreneurship to, and what can we do to make this generation or this decade a golden age for entrepreneurs?
Well, I think you've captured the essence of this tectonic plate shift in our economy, not just in the United States, but globally in terms of technology. And I think it was a golden period, as you noted. It was really driven by a number of factors, Caleb, in my view. One without any doubt, it was driven by just development of technology, primarily the internet as a base. I always kid about that Al Gore invented that internet, and the vice president didn't invent the internet, but he certainly brought forward to President Clinton, me, and others the importance of technology and what a driving force it could be. So that's really when I became really tuned into this, before you saw the technology boom. So I think, one, you had new ways of doing business, new ways of collecting data, new ways of just organizing your life. Number two, it was pretty low barrier to entry. So you had a lot of firms, jump in early, attract capital, and you named them. Those are now household words. And if you look at the New York Stock Exchange, the Fortune 100, all of these measurements, has it ever shifted, Caleb, in the last decade, much less going back 20, 30 years? Very different set of acronyms or company notations on the New York Stock Exchange, and you'll see tech companies obviously heavily weighted, and that's one reason the stock market has done well in recent months. I think fundamentally, though, on the U.S. economy and the global economy, Caleb, what we really saw in that period in the 90s was technology drove significant improvements in productivity. And that allowed our economy to grow without inflation. And a rising tide indeed lifted all boats. So you had rising incomes at individual levels from all sectors. You had rising performance by companies because they were more efficient and more profitable. And frankly, being part of the Clinton administration during that period, we would like to think we had some pretty responsible economic policies that supported job creation, but also we managed to reduce and then balance the federal budget and brought the deficit to zero and, in fact, achieved a surplus. I think that's quite important.
And one of the biggest challenges facing a young company, especially entrepreneurs here in Arkansas, is access to capital. There's no shortage of good ideas or innovative startups, but there are fewer opportunities for funding, especially when compared to more urban areas or the coasts. How do we close that gap when it comes to access to capital for entrepreneurs?
Caleb, a couple of observations responding to your very insightful, thoughtful question. Of course, you're living it every day in your startup junkie work and working with young entrepreneurs. I think a couple of points. I believe we're in the process of closing that gap. At least that's what I'd like to think. But the first basic point I would make, Caleb, is important as venture capital is. There's always the cart before the horse, the chicken and the egg, old cliches, but you remember them. I think for any young entrepreneur, the real essence is to develop a technology, a product, a customer base, and a company. Have something that's developed and that then can move to the next level, i.e. scale, with additional capital. But I'm a little bit wary, I have a pause about pursuing capital in advance of those business fundamentals. So I think I would start with that premise in responding to your question. To state further, though, in Arkansas, you've got the Heartland effort by the Walton family that obviously is supporting your endeavor. You've got a very, I think, pro-business leadership in our government at a state level, whether it be Republican or Democrat. I think we've had a tradition of that in Arkansas. I think in our individual parts of the state, we've had very active local chambers of commerce here in Little Rock with Jay Chesser, Randy Zook from the state chamber, and the AEDC, which our younger son Franklin was chairman of, and my mother was the first woman to be appointed to that group, which I'm very proud of to this day. So I think you've had a real collaboration between public and private sectors. So all of that to me kind of fits under the rubric of what you see with J.D. Vance and Hillbilly Elegy. I think there's a recognition that the heartland, which would include Arkansas, needs a particular innovation emphasis on capital development for entrepreneurs. The final thing I would say, you're in Northwest Arkansas. You've got some of the greatest companies, not only in America, but the world there, in addition to the University of Arkansas. And that, to me, is, if it's not nirvana, it is certainly a great environment for young entrepreneurs to develop their technology and products.
Absolutely. And you serve as the non-executive chairman of the Firmament Group, a global investment platform that helps turn small businesses into big businesses with tailored debt and equity capital solutions. What can you tell us about the firm's investment criteria?
Well, I'm just drafting behind our younger son, Franklin, in the Firmament Group. He established that firm with Chris Smith, his partner, and they have done well with it, and I'm proud of them. And when I say they've done well, not only have they been very astute and successful and disciplined in their investments, both equity and mezzanine debt, but they also have really helped mid-sized companies grow. And many of those companies have been right here in Arkansas. And Franklin, with his background and his commitment to the state, as our older son Mark has as well, is committed to that. So the criteria, first of all, it is an SBIC fund, which means a matching fund. They do have to raise private capital. They've been very successful, but it does match with the SBIC. There's a number of those throughout our country. That's an established program that has been in our SBA for many, many years. So they have that criteria. Then I think they really look for the right companies in the right geography and sectors. But importantly, Caleb, as you well know, they look for the management and leadership of that endeavor and that potential opportunity and how capital, kind of going back to my first point, build a business model, build a product, build a customer base, and then move it to the next level or scale. And without that compatibility of both vision and, frankly, a level of trust and confidence in that entrepreneur, they really don't make that investment. Those criteria have served them very, very well. They're now on their third fund. And again, I'm very proud of what they've done, not only business-wise, but also developing companies. And in the process, Caleb, importantly, developing really good-paying jobs in our state and in this part of the country.
Are there certain areas that you are seeing that are especially pinched right now that could really need certain capital solutions?
Well, I think the coronavirus has obviously taken a real toll on certain industries. There's no question about that. And you do see some of the larger venture capital funds like SoftBank, for example, pulling back, and even Silicon Valley's kind of realigning in some of their thinking. But, it's a crisis and opportunity. I think in the process, it does create some additional opportunities. But what I would also note, Caleb, is in terms of some of these sectors where you were developing technology, for example, perhaps that was associated with airlines or hospitality or, reservation system or whatever it might be, I think there's ways to flip that into other industries, because every industry, even basic industry, and this is one thing that led you to your current endeavor, technology is just driving all of industry, whether it be a Tyson Foods, a J.B. Hunt, a Walmart. Our business is much smaller, including in our own family business endeavors. So it is a fertile field. It is not easy. It takes hard work. It takes some element of luck, and it does take alignment with the right investors, as you're noting. But I think it also takes, frankly, a lot of perseverance and courage to continue. And you see that time and time again. But I go back, you've got to develop that fundamental business model first.
And what advice might you give a growth-oriented entrepreneur who, perhaps they've spent time building their team and building their technology, yep, and now they're ready they've made the decision to bring on investors. What advice might you give them?
Well, it's a big decision. So first of all, make that decision in a very thoughtful, serious, selective, targeted manner. I mean, you're really selling your years of hard work, so, blood, sweat, and tears, as the old saying goes. You're selling equity. I would also say that before you make a decision to go with a larger institutional firm, there's nothing wrong with that, but at least consider more of the friends and family type investors, because I think, Caleb, it is essential, and I go back to your point or earlier question about Firmament Group, it is essential that the investor be aligned with the management and founder, entrepreneur, and vice versa, that the management and founder be aligned with the investor. And as my father liked to often say, have as good a front-end understanding as you possibly can have. In other words, understand really what the other is trying to accomplish. And I've had many partnerships, not all, but many, including my current partnership with Bob Johnson, who founded BET. We've been in partnership now for 13 years, and we have not ever looked at the agreement that we wrote and signed. That's the kind of alignment and partnership you want.
Absolutely. And as someone with extensive experience in both the private and public sectors, what role do you think government plays in the democratization of innovation? The general idea that anybody should be able to create anything anywhere.
Yeah. Well, it's a great question, and it's a great goal. It may be aspirational in some ways, but it is essential. Because, Caleb, if you look back, at least not to get too retrospective in history, but the middle class, a broad prosperity in our country is what's made America strong and different. And so now I think we're a much more diverse country than we were 10, 15, 20 years ago, certainly when I was starting out in a place called Hope. So I think it's, and not only in terms of culture, race, but also in ethnicity and gender. So I think it's incumbent upon government, both at the federal level, but Caleb, I cannot emphasize enough at the state and local level to really be very purposeful and committed about that inclusionary approach to whether it be in this field of capital or more broadly. I would say that, and I think we're seeing that. I'm very hopeful and optimistic in this aspect. It won't be perfect. It won't happen overnight, but I think there is a recognition of it at a much higher level, and I think we're seeing that happen. I would also say that government is naturally a catalyst for this kind of growth. Governments can spur things, and that's precisely what an SBA, a Chamber of Commerce, an Economic Development Commission, a local Economic Development Commission at the city or county level. That's exactly what you want to see. And you, jumping ahead just a bit, Caleb, I would also say Arkansas particularly is really fortunate to have some just first-class, indeed world-class financial institutions. You've got, and I really am hesitant to kind of name them all because there's a real good-sized number. But my point is, with those institutions, we can take a lot of pride in, who are now what I would call super regionals. But they're very attuned to local needs. And so once I think an entrepreneur gets his or her venture off the ground, and I think this certainly applies to minorities and women as well, then you have perhaps intermediate capital like a Firmament Group or other New Roads, others. Stevens Inc. has been very active in this space, among others. But then I think traditional financing takes place, and I think Arkansas is very well positioned with the financial institutions we have in that regard.
Absolutely. And we've seen the Firmament Group in the past kind of team up with USDA to kind of offer, to create those funds
with Secretary Vilsack, Tom Vilsack,
absolutely.
who's governor of Iowa, and Tom is a friend, and I like, have had the good fortune to know and work with him, and I respect him. But coming from Iowa, he certainly understood the heartland ethos of how you needed to support companies and entrepreneurship in those mid-sized and even rural areas. And Caleb, look, you see it up there in your part of the world. You see it throughout eastern Arkansas, for example, and throughout our state. I mean, agriculture is a big part of our state. But, with food security, food supply, all of these things, that is ripe for technology. These are old, these are industries that go back centuries. But new technologies, particularly with environmental stewardship being so important, it is right for entrepreneurs to focus on that area in our state and other states that are engaged in agriculture. So there's a lot of opportunities there.
Absolutely. And
you're almost getting me on my soapbox here and almost preaching, but I get excited and hopeful when I think about this.
Absolutely, same here. As someone who is from East Arkansas, absolutely.
Forest City, yeah,
yes,
Forest
sir.
City Mustang, yeah.
So, some may argue that government helps best when it can get out of the way in certain instances. An example would be, the kind of restrictive criteria for accredited investors.
Right.
How might we better balance protecting would-be investors from risk and opening up investment opportunities for scaling startups?
Well, it's a complicated issue, number one, not easy. Like most things, there's pros and cons to every policy decision or judgment. I think in this case, the SEC has already moved, as you know, given the way you stay right on top of things in your activities. The SEC has already put forward an accredited investor approach that lowers the threshold for the investment criteria. And the basic premise, as I understand it, is you don't want just the wealthy or uber wealthy to have total access or monopoly on investing in startup companies. You want to democratize that, to use your word. I think that's very good. It's much like the stock market now has almost 50% of our country holds stock. Having said that, I think there has to be a very careful element of transparency and balance in any legislation like that, where investors are protected, at least in a reasonable way, in terms of information about what they're investing. And you would hope that investors would seek good financial advice and only put a portion of their savings or whatever in those investments. But I like the idea of broadening that. But I go back to my earlier point about friends and family. That's another way to do this in a more informal way. But I definitely think it should be broadened, to answer your question.
And so I've picked your brain on a number of things, both entrepreneurial and political. So now I'm going to ask some questions about you, Mr. McLarty. Successful entrepreneurs and politicians know to surround themselves with smart and resourceful people. President Clinton obviously knew that when he hired you. You've accomplished a great deal in both public and private sectors. How have you gone about finding talented people to surround yourself with?
Okay, first, thanks for your kind comments. And I would also say, first, it was a privilege to work with President Clinton, but even more fundamentally, to serve the American people in government. I'd had the opportunity to work with President George H.W. Bush, as well as President Carter at a much earlier age, but President George H.W. Bush when I was in the natural gas business. So that is a rare privilege, and I'm grateful for that. In terms of people that work with me and our family in our endeavors, they all kind of have a story to them. They're like a municipal bond. They all have a story behind them, because they're individual. You're making a deal. You're reaching an agreement. You're reaching a partnership, a relationship with one person, and you're fitting that in a manner to that person and that particular opportunity. In our case, I think we have looked number one, for compatibility, as well as experience and knowledge. I mean, those are kind of the basics of any decision on people. But you want to get people, not necessarily who always agree with you, but who you think are at least aligned with your thinking and philosophy. Integrity obviously comes into play. We have certainly taken the approach that you have to broaden that alignment in the financial returns of a business, i.e. stock or incentive, and where it fits, and possibly in most cases it has been, get investment participation from that partner and people. But I think, human nature being what it is, people are going to naturally want to work for someone they respect, that they trust, and they feel who will be fair and even-handed in giving them an opportunity to succeed. And that's really how we've tried to attract and maintain people. And we've been very lucky. I would say blessed. And we've had many, many long-standing partnerships that have just served both parties very, very well over the years. So those are the criteria.
And some of the most successful people tend to have habits or work routines that kind of set them apart. And some people will, attribute some of their successes to their unique habits or routines. Do you have any unique habits that you think have helped you over the years?
Well, Caleb, you're not suggesting I'm a person of kind of order and so forth. No, I think I do think each individual entrepreneur, business person, and that extends to other fields as well. Caleb, I think honestly has to be true to themselves. So you really have to be comfortable in your own skin and have a certain level of confidence and commitment about what you're doing, and a certain degree of passion for it. You have to like what you're doing. If you don't, if you're not finding meaning in what you're doing and some joy and sense of accomplishment, you probably should be thinking about maybe shifting that at some point and doing something else. In my case, I think pretty early on in high school, I did have an opportunity to have a mentor who was my high school student council sponsor and English teacher about setting priorities and setting certain goals or activities to achieve those priorities. And that leads to kind of hopefully having a vision, having a plan, and then having a work plan of execution and holding yourself and those involved with you in the endeavor accountable. So those are kind of the traits. They're pretty basic, but they've served me well over the years.
And you've helped build one of Arkansas's best recognized legacy businesses, one started by your father in the auto industry. Aside from your dream of being the next Harry Carey, was there ever a time when you wanted to go out on your own and do something different?
Well, you're showing your reporter journalist roots there, Caleb, in that question. You've done your homework, because you and I have had interviews before. You're right about Harry Carey. I did want to be a sports announcer when I was growing up in Hope, and it was a great joy to do that in my younger years. And just speaking of that, how people touch people, I read Lou Brock, who was a St. Louis Cardinal Hall of Famer who passed away, his obituary this morning. He's born in El Dorado, Arkansas, African American, and he was inspired listening to Harry Carey on KMOX to become a Major League Baseball player when he heard the exploits of Jackie Robinson as a Brooklyn Dodger playing against the St. Louis Cardinals. Now, that's a deviation, but it does really show, going back to your junior achievement question earlier, how one kind of moment can be a spark and a motivation. And Lou Brock certainly lived an exemplary life and really lifted many others aside from his baseball exploits. But to your point about thinking about doing something else, in my case, Caleb, it was pretty natural to join my father in our endeavors. I had a number of decisions very quickly to attend either the University of Arkansas or go out of state. I considered going out of state, visited those campuses. At the end of the day, I did not. I think it was one of the best decisions I ever made, but it had clearly an element of serendipitous to it. I mean, you have to have a few of those things just work in the right way, and perhaps reflection and prayer help reach those decisions. Dr. Lee Bodenhammer, who is someone you might have encountered in Northwest Arkansas, who taught at the University of Arkansas, but prior to that, taught at Harvard University, established a very successful financial institution in Arkansas. He's been very benevolent to the University of Arkansas. Sponsored me to go to Harvard Business School. And Don and I were just married, and we were very serious about doing that after I graduated from the University of Arkansas. But my father's health had begun to break a bit. I felt like I needed to get back home, and we made that decision as opposed to go to graduate school. And I sometimes wonder how my life might have taken a different turn had I gone to Harvard to business school and had a different perspective. But as it turns out, I'm not sure I'd changed too much. I've had a good life, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that I've had, and I'm grateful for the people that have supported those opportunities that I've had an opportunity to work with, both within our organization and without. So I'm very, very fortunate there, very blessed.
And for many entrepreneurs, the end goal is a successful exit. But others want to pass on what they've built and kind of carry on the legacy. For them, succession planning is very important. You having helped build a 100-year-old legacy business, family business, how did you approach succession planning?
Well, we still are. We're kind of in the midst of that, and I'm certainly standing on the shoulders of my father and grandfather, but particularly my father. So I'm very mindful of that and very grateful for it. As you know, our two sons, Mark and Franklin, have their own endeavors, but they're associated with our family business endeavors and activities and heritage. I think in terms of succession and also exit, which you brought up, which plays right into a entrepreneurial and venture capital endeavor, I don't think those, Caleb, are mutually exclusive. And I say that because we have exited from businesses and then renewed and redeployed in either similar or different businesses. So I don't think there's necessarily any connotation, negative or positive, about exiting or not. In our case, we've had a continuum of a commitment to Arkansas and this part of the world, to our people, to offering people opportunities and building organizations and companies. And I think Mark and Franklin both share that deeply in terms of their gratitude toward the state, recognition of the heritage, both of our family, but much more broadly. Many others who have supported us over the years. They have both seen broad horizons in their own endeavors, in their education and work, particularly Mark, who's worked abroad in China and Mexico and Brazil, but Franklin's had a broad perspective as well. So I think they have kind of understood kind of having wings and roots, but their roots are very much in Arkansas, in this part of the country. So I think all that goes to succession and heritage and the values, and that's how we look at it. And there's, of course, a lot of other aspects to it in terms of, succession planning, estate planning, and so forth. But it really gets down to that core principle. Do you want to maintain that sense of continuity and that sense of heritage? And I certainly did, and I'm very Donna, my wife and partner for 50 plus years, who's just been indispensable in all of my endeavors, graduated from the University of Arkansas. In fact, the Walton School of Business prior to it being named Walton School of Business, but same school at that particular time. We're very, very, very grateful for that.
And those roots have a hold here in Northwest Arkansas, and that you'll have a presence here as well.
Great way to put it.
We call these events, though they're televised and virtual now, game changers, kind of game changer conversations. And we like to ask our guests about game changing moments in their life and career. That moment where perhaps the preparation met opportunity. What was that moment for you, Mr. McLarty?
Caleb, I've been asked that question a number of times over the years, and I don't have a precise answer, even to an accomplished journalist and now entrepreneur like you. I think I've had several of those moments. I mentioned about high school in Hope, Arkansas, where my student council sponsor kind of sparked a broader horizon by sponsoring me to the Hearst Senate Foundation effort in Washington when I was 17, very similar to Boys Nation. Certainly going back and working in our family business with my father, I can remember moments when I knew that was what I wanted to do. When I joined Arkla Gas, which was one of the few New York Stock Exchange companies in Arkansas at the time, having been on the board of directors, which was a great privilege for me, that was a moment where you broadened your horizon and you were in a different industry that was changing. Certainly getting the request from a friend of long standing to work with him as chief of staff after he was elected as governor of your home state, that's a life changer for sure. And as Senator Howard Baker tells the story, who was chief of staff to President Reagan, it's pretty difficult to, in my case, have a friend of long standing ask you to, and governor of your home state, sharing a political philosophy, to work with him and support him in his endeavor, not to view that as a call to service, and indeed a call to duty, and indeed it was. And then in the next passage, to continue building on some of those experiences, both internationally and in our family business endeavors. So there's been a number of moments. I know that doesn't quite hit the mark with your journalistic preciseness, but those have been the passages, and there have been moments when you knew that was the right passage at the right time. And Caleb, I would only say what that suggests to many people that you're working with. There's going to be renewal and change in all of these endeavors and all of these individuals, and they need to keep that before them. Although I think contemporary people starting out in business of this generation are much more adroit, much more nimble about that than perhaps my generation was.
One of my favorite songs in Hamilton is "History Has Its Eyes on You." When George Washington tells Alexander Hamilton, you have no control in who tells your story. But for the sake of this conversation, right now, let's say that you do have a say. How do you want historians to judge your legacy, Mr. McLarty, and what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, that's a pretty big question, Caleb. I mean, you picked, of course, a great musical there to cite, and it has provided joy and memories for many of us, for sure. I don't focus too much on the legacy issue. I try to focus on the day and what's important before you. They asked Archie Manning that once, and great quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, having been an All-American, University of Mississippi, obviously Peyton and Eli's father. And he said, my father suggested one time to me, he said, Archie, what do you want to be remembered by or for? And he said, I just want to be remembered as a good guy, just somebody that treated others like I wanted to be treated. And that's basically a reframing of the golden rule, of course. So that's a pretty good legacy in and of itself. I think we all have feelings about our relationship with family, our endeavors, and so forth. but you really would like to be viewed as somebody who left things a little better than when you found them, and that someone who treated people with dignity, respect, and fairness, and lifted a few lives or helped a few people along the way. I think that's about the closest I can get to it this morning.
Mr. McLarty, I don't think it'll be a problem at all for you to be remembered as a nice guy. I think that'll be easy. It's been a pleasure to visit with you, Mr. McLarty, and it's an honor to know you, and I greatly appreciate you for taking the time to field some questions and give some insight to our entrepreneurial community here in Northwest Arkansas.
Caleb, thank you for asking me. The pleasure's been mine. Good luck on your endeavors. They're important. You're making a difference.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.